coin grading for the last about 150 or now almost 155 years. We're going to take a quick look at sort of how grading got where it is today and maybe discuss for a few minutes about where grading may be going in the future. We're going to get started with a look at the early years here. The 1860 to 1937 era was sort of a free-for-all era, but I think the topic of grading really got its birth in the late 1850s. There were several major auctions held in Philadelphia and New York between about 1856 and 1860. There was a lot of renewed interest or new interest in coins at that time for several reasons. One was the discontinuance of the large cent and the introduction of the small cent. That was a major change in our coinage, and it began to get some people interested. The other interesting fact is that at that point, the people that were alive for the birth of U.S. coinage were getting very old and starting to die off. And anytime you go through that dynamic where people no longer remember the very earliest stuff, it begins to feel and sound very old. So by about 1860, there weren't many people that could really remember the birth of U.S. coinage back in 1793. So that's kind of when the U.S. coin market and hobby really got its start. As I said, it's about 1857, 58, 59. George Jones wrote a book called The Coin Collector's Manual, published in 1860, and he noted what some of the grades in use at the time were. And you can see right here, he talked about good and very good, fair, poor, fine, very fine, uncirculated, and proof. But what was most interesting is down below where he said allowance must be made in some cases as to the condition of the coin sold, as for instance what one may call uncirculated, others would only denominate as fine or very good. I don't think we'd have those kinds of differences today, but it certainly shows you at the time how ill-defined these grades were. You know, we would never confuse very good and uncirculated today. So it certainly illustrates the early nature of coin grading. Not much happened in the 1870s and 1880s. By 1892, the Numismatist was being published. You can see here we're only on volume 4, number 2, so it wasn't that old. But Joseph Hooper proposed a 12-point numerical scale here you see using Roman numerals. And he started with 1 and proceeded down to 12, being very poor. And once again, he sort of defined the basic terminology that we would be using for some time to come. One interesting thing about his scale is if you look here at the bottom, you'll see that 4 of the grades were below good. In other words, fair, very fair, fair, poor, and very poor. These days, we don't pay much attention to grades that low, even though the coins may still not look great. It's very hard to sell a coin that you describe as fair or even very fair. So today, those coins would probably be closer to good or very good. While his use of the numbers never caught on, once again, the basic adjectival scale that you see here would pretty much suffice for the next 75 years. Now, the trick would be, of course, defining what all these things meant, and that took a little bit longer to get fully understood by the hobby. Between, about 1905 and 1935 or so, there weren't a lot of coin books out there about U.S. coins. This was, of course, prior to, Whitman's Red Book and prior to even the standard catalog that was published during the 1940s. But a coin dealer in Fort Worth, Texas, named B. Max Mell used to publish the Star Rare Coin Encyclopedia. And that sort of was the most commonly found booklet floating around on U.S. coins. I believe he published it either every year or just about every year. And in it he did devote a page to grading, and he listed the 6 basic grades: proof, uncirculated, fine, good, fair, and poor. And once again, he made an attempt to define them, but it wasn't really a very good attempt, because if you notice carefully, the descriptions for fine and good were exactly the same. Coins that have seen considerable circulation, but every feature of the coin must show plainly. It must not show any bad scratches or nicks. So with those 2 grades being defined identically, you can still see that there was some problem among the general public really understanding and picturing what these grades looked like. So there you have it. Now, standardization somewhat began, I would say, between 1935 and the late 40s. Like I said, there was a New York dealer by the name of VIII Raymond, and he published the standard catalog of U.S. coins, and he added very good, very fine, and extremely fine to B-Max Mel's grades. And again, this is sort of still the pre-Red Book era. But the standard catalog really served pretty much as the Bible of the hobby during the late 30s and the early 40s. And while grading was still approximate and subject to interpretation, as it still is arguably, there was this continued movement toward using established published terminology. And you saw fewer and fewer strange descriptions, like if you look in the early part of the century, the catalogs might say things like about proof, or about fine, or nearly this, or things that you wouldn't normally see. But by the 30s and 40s, you were starting to see auctioneers and dealers stick to a little more consistency in their descriptions. So these various grades were starting to come into focus. In the fall of 1946, Whitman published their first edition of the Red Book. And the Red Book was one of the first coin books issued by what we might call today an independent third party. In other words, VIII Raymond was a dealer back in the 30s and 40s, and B-Max Mel, certainly in the teens and 20s and early 30s, were both private dealers, so to speak. And Whitman brought to the market truly an impartial look, because they were not in the business of buying and selling coins. They were in the business of publishing. So the Red Book caught on very quickly, and by the mid-50s, it was pretty much considered the Bible of the hobby. While the original Red Book, first edition, didn't talk about grading, by the late 50s, you see the condition of coins was out. Oops, excuse me, let me back that up. I apologize. There we are. By the late 50s, the 8 basic grades were outlined here. As you see, proof, uncirculated, XF, VF, fine, very good, good, fair. And now the descriptions were all different, and while it was still impossible really to pick up a coin and grade from these descriptions, you're starting to see a pretty standardized structure now firmly in place. And this was a very important development, because at this point now you really weren't getting things like about fine or nearly this or that. I mean, you were starting to see dealers and auctioneers try to stick to a somewhat defined scale. Now, as a peripheral development that was sort of out of the mainstream, in 1949, Early American Sense was published by Dr. William Sheldon. And he undertook a very comprehensive discussion of of coin grading in somewhat of a scientific manner in a chapter in the book called Towards a Science of Cent Values. And he really took a very close look at a coin's condition, its market value, and attempted to create a numerical scale that quantified that relationship, of all things. And he used the 10 adjectival grades that were basically in use. Here's again fair, very good, fine, very fine, XF, and AU. and he used a number to represent the condition of the coin. Now, what that number was an approximate dollar value for a 1794 cent in these various states of preservation. As an example, you see condition 1, Basel state, or what we might call poor or identifiable and unmutilated, was worth about $1 back in 1948. A coin in what we would call good condition today might have been a $4 coin. And you can see on up, a VF was worth about $20, an XF worth about $40. So this would have been for a very common variety of 1794 large cent. And once again, you see that stated here. The very, very finest 1794 cent, a lovely red uncirculated coin at the time, was worth about $70. Okay? And that explains why we have today this 70-point scale. I think all of us will readily admit that 70 is a strange place to stop a scale. 50 would be more intuitive, and certainly 100 would be far more intuitive. But the fact that a 1794 cent, a gem, was worth $70 in 1948 basically accounts for this scale. Had he written the book 5 years later or 6 years later, maybe in the mid-50s, we might have gotten the 100-point scale that some of us talk about having today. So that is the explanation for our current Sheldon scale. However, this scale really did not come into common use during the 1950s and 60s. It would be about 25 years before this scale spread onto other coins other than the large cent and the small large cent community that used it. In 1958, the Oklahoma dealers Brown and Dunn published the first book really devoted exclusively to grading U.S. coins. It was a small 66-page booklet, paperback, entitled A Guide to Grading U.S. Coins. And they discussed each series and gave pretty thorough verbal explanations about what needed to qualify for a particular grade. Once again, they used the 6 basic circulated grades that you see here, and included 2 others, of course, for early and rare coins, fair and about good. I believe this was really the first time that about good came into practice. Prior to that, it had been described as very fair. But I think about good is a little more descriptive of the coin, and certainly uses the word good, which is, if you're trying to sell a coin, I guess a good thing. The little booklet became very popular, and Whitman acquired the rights to publish the work from Brown and Dunn. And by the 4th edition, which was 1964, 50 years ago today, it was a 206-page hardcover book and included line drawings of the coins, which you see here. In other words, you had the grade, you had the description, and you had a line drawing showing, of course, the smooth areas of the coins, and of course the area with detail. And this book had just been published when I started collecting, and I remember as a very young kid reading and studying this book very carefully, and learning to grade coins using this method. They were very proud of their line drawings, which I think were quite good, and it said they were, they're the furthest advance in coin grading to date. Placed as they are adjacent to each paragraph, the task at arriving at the condition of any coin becomes pleasantly accurate. And that's a bit optimistic because, of course, beauty is still in the eye of the beholder, and even more importantly, grade is a matter that the owner often errs in his own favor, and the buyer will often err against. So it certainly didn't solve all the disputes or all the uncertainties surrounding grading, but it went a very long way towards giving people a very good visual representation of what some of these various grades would look like. During the decade of the 60s, Brown and Dunn standards became almost universally adopted throughout the hobby. And if you look at a Coin World ad from the late 60s, early 70s era, Virtually all of them say in the bottom, all coins graded to Brown and Dunn standards. So they really can't be underestimated for their establishment of a really good understanding of the basic circulated grades for most U.S. coins. Once you have line drawings, the next step is photography, and it was Jim Ruddy's breakthrough book Photograde, published in 1970, that brought photographs to the grading world. And this book was published by Bowers and Ruddy Galleries, and really turned the hobby upside down, because finally you had high-resolution black and white photographs for all U.S. coins and virtually all the circulated grades. And this book was a huge, huge boon to the average collector. I remember anxiously getting mine and spending many, many hours studying it page by page. Ruddy really didn't do much in terms of revolutionizing the descriptions or the grades. He simply presented reasonably good photographs. Now today we can do much better, but once again for 1970 I think the job was certainly very admirable. One thing that both Photograde and Brown and Dunn had in common was that neither of those systems really talked about uncirculated coins. They all sort of took you from, fair or about good up through about uncirculated. But once a coin became uncirculated, there really wasn't much to the grading game. And the reason behind that principally was that there wasn't much to the pricing game either. Gem coins were worth a little more than than ordinary, what we might call today ordinary uncirculated coins, but not a whole lot. I remember when I was at coin shows in 1970, 71, and 72, I would go around to the bourse tables, and back then you still saw rolls of Barber quarters or Mercury dimes or Standing Liberty quarters kind of spread out on a tray, and there was a little sign that might say, Unk Standing Liberty quarters, $18 each, your pick 20. So the very, very nicest coins of the roll might have had a 10 or 20% premium over the ordinary coins in the roll, but that was about it. So with a 10 or 20% price premium, there wasn't a whole lot of controversy or to do about grading uncirculated coins. During the early 70s, though, grading for especially uncirculated coins became more important, because as I was just saying, what started as a 10% quality premium for a gem uncirculated coin had grown to a 200 to 300% premium by the middle of the decade and approached 1,000% by the end of the decade. Now this is a photograph of the type coin section from a 1974 gray sheet. And you can see even then you were still only barely 200% between 60 and 65. If you look, Shield nickels with rays 125 and 60, 265. Large size bust dimes 650 and 60, 1275 and 65. Here's seated Liberty dimes, $70 and 60, only $105 and 65. So you can see that worrying about whether a coin was a 63 or a 64 or a 65 didn't make a huge amount of difference in the value of the coin, and consequently didn't receive a whole lot of attention. So you can understand why the grading of uncirculated coins in the early and mid-70s was not nearly so critical as it later became. But by the late 70s and the early 80s, you had a obsession with quality, I'll say, and I don't mean to use obsession in a pejorative way. It's just people began to become very, very concerned about how nice the uncirculated coin was. And the differences that formerly were ignored took on greater and greater importance. So that by the early 80s, quality was paramount. Now, with this interest, the coin dealer newsletter, of course, had to transform itself, because whereas at one time it only looked at one uncirculated grade, and by 1974 you were looking at two, as the 70s wore into the 80s, the slice had to be done finer and finer. In other words, MS-63 and MS-64 took on importance. And if you want to take a few minutes to look through this chronology, I know there's a lot to read here, but it does show you at least the progress that was made between, during the 15 years from 1971 to 1986 when things appeared. In other words, you see type coins got broken into two grades in 1971, then gold coins the next year. MS-65 and 70 started coming into use by 1973. Type coins got listed both in 60 and 65. They broke out silver dollars in 1975, commemoratives in 1976, proof type coins also in 1976, then silver commemoratives. Silver dollars got the MS-63 column by 1980, type coins, gold coins, and commemoratives the next year, and then in 64, silver dollars got, in 1985, silver dollars got 64, and then the following year, 64 spread to everything else. So you can see between 1971 and 1986, the grading system that we use today basically emerged as values accelerated for the upper end, leaving more and more distance between low-end uncirculated and high-end uncirculated coins. So the old saying that necessity is the mother of invention is pretty much accurate here. This was how the Coin Dealer newsletter announced it. It was a big headline in 1980, MS-63 column added to dollar charts with an exclamation point. And then in 1985, you see MS-64 column added to dollar charts. So that's sort of how we ended up where we are, is just it was brought about by a need because the price spreads got so wide that coins could begin to fit in between grades. So that's sort of the birth of the single point system. Now, to backtrack just a bit, by the mid-70s, as I said, as price differences widened, the ANA, or American Numismatic Association, became more and more interested in consumer protection. And in 1973, Virginia Culver, who was then president of the ANA, started an effort to establish the official grading standards for U.S. coins. And she turned to some industry veterans, Abe Kossoff, Ken Brissett, Q. David Bowers, and Harvey Stack, to work on standards which were released in 1977 in a book called The Official ANA Grading Standards for U.S. Coins. And you see an early edition here over to the right. I believe it's now in its, I believe it's its 7th edition printing. And in form, it resembled an expanded Brown and Dunn book, once again using detailed line drawings. However, this time they did discuss uncirculated coins a little bit. And again, you see this looks like an updated Brown and Dunn, but you do see the use of numbers here, 8, 12, 4, things like that. But anyway, with the ANA backing these standards, it further cemented the basic definitions and reinforced among the dealing community the need to adhere to these types of standards, because if a dealer was straying from the ANA, that really wasn't a good thing, and they did definitely hear about it. Like I said, they did discuss uncirculated coins, and keep in mind the first edition included only 60, 65, and 70, but by 1981 they had included 63 and 67. So once again, the move to the single step uncirculated scale took place in parts, step by step. In 1979, the ANA started the ANACS grading service. It had, since 1972, they had been authenticating coins, but in 1979 they began to add grades, and it was headed up by Tom Delory and Ed Rochette. And their product was a certificate, which you see here on the right, that included a photograph of the obverse and reverse of the coin and a grade for the obverse and reverse of the coin. I'm not sure you can read this well, but here you see MS65/65 representing obverse and reverse. Unfortunately, for very small coins, the photos were pretty much actual size, and for small gold coins, gold commemoratives, things like that, you know, if the coin didn't have a really distinguishing mark, the photograph wasn't always easy to match to the coin, and very often unscrupulous dealers might substitute a slightly inferior coin for the one and sell the photograph with it. The other problem was the separate obverse-reverse grades were somewhat confusing to people. You know, if you got a coin back graded 65, 63, like I said, it sort of orphaned the coin, and it was very, very difficult to sell a coin like that. The most common grade I remember dealing in these was 63, 65, because typical Morgan dollar has a cheek area that has a large area that's very susceptible to scrapes and nicks and scratches, whereas the reverse somehow always seemed to be nicer. So we used to get lots of 63/65 silver dollars, and there weren't a lot of people that wanted them. I mean, they were kind of dead in the water. So it was a very, very tough coin to sell. During the early 80s, the definition of the uncirculated grades progressively became tougher and tougher. There was a movement on to sort of show price appreciation during 1983 and 84 and 85. And without a strict enforced third-party standard, most buying dealers could sort of define their own coins. In other words, if I put out a bid to buy an MS65 coin in 1984 at bid, let's say, gray sheet bid, and people sent me coins, I didn't have to buy them. I could reject them and say, no, I don't grade this 65. So I could progressively raise my CDN bid price by requiring a tougher and tougher coin and refusing more and more coins that were sent to me. So what happened is between the early and mid-80s, the definition for what qualified as an MS65 got progressively tougher as the bid price accelerated. So by 1986, the ANA Board of Governors released a statement here. This is important, saying it may be the situation that a coin which was graded MS65 by the grading service in 1981 or 82, for example, may, if regraded in 1985 or 6, merit the current interpretation of MS63 or less. Similarly, dealers and others in the commercial sector have found that coins graded MS65 years ago may merit MS64 or lower interpretations today. Well, that really rocked the world, particularly among the collectors, because now all of a sudden grades were movable. And, you know, a coin that you paid a premium for as a very nice MS65 back in, say, 1982, now is legally, according to everybody, only an MS63 or maybe at best an MS64 and worth considerably less than you thought it was. This was not a good situation for collectors or investors. And once again, this is an important slide. This stunning announcement confirmed what dealers and advanced collectors had known, that unless a constant and inviolable standard was quickly established, the hobby would suffer irreparable damage and a loss of confidence among the buyers. And this set the stage for rather dramatic action. And this basically led to the development of PCGS in 1986. The specter of gradeflation threatened to undermine the hobby, and a group of dealers met in California to discuss how to fix the problem. Led by David Hall, it included John Danruther, Gordon Rubel, Steve Serkin, Bruce Emspacher, John Albanese, and Sil DeGeneva. And they basically had the idea of forming an independent service whose opinions would not only stand the test of time, but would garner universal acceptance in the market. And never short of hyperbole sometimes, PCGS touted itself as the solution to the grading problem. And while at the time it seemed like a pretty audacious claim, it was pretty accurate, and for the most part, PCGS did take a very large step towards solving the problem. It did this in three important ways, or with three important innovations. One is the coins were encapsulated in a tamper-proof hard plastic holder, and this way the coin remained in the exact condition it was when it was examined. What you're looking at over here on the right is the very first PCGS holder, which used a white insert and a very plain case. But it was very important that these coins were sealed, because even ANACS coins with a photograph were not sealed, and a coin could be dropped or scraped or lightly damaged in some way and keep the ANACS certificate with it. With PCGS, you really didn't have that problem anymore. Whatever the coin looked like when it was graded was how it was going to be, provided it had not been broken out of the case and resealed, which at the time was pretty evident if a coin had been cracked out and the case had been put back together. Second, PCGS set up a network of authorized dealers, and which required unconditional acceptance of PCGS graded coins if they placed a buy price. In other words, if you went on to the teletype network, or later the A&E, the ANI network, and placed a bid for an MS65 1880S dollar, and you were sent one in a PCGS holder, you had to buy it. You couldn't just say, no, this is not a 65, and return it. And as a consequence, it really gave some teeth to the bid prices and a lot of credibility to dealers' bid prices. And thirdly, it set up a live trading market, the American Numismatic Exchange, once again, which was referred to as ANI, and it was a satellite-based system, and dealers were able, once again, to buy and sell on the exchange, and they knew that the bid price or the ask price was a guarantee. In other words, if you saw someone bidding to buy the coin and you had one, you could pretty much consider it sold. If a dealer had a problem with the grade, in other words, if they got the coin and disagreed with it, they went back to PCGS for recourse. In other words, you didn't send it back to the dealer and say, no, I don't want it. You sent it back to PCGS and you said, take another look. And being human, occasionally, rarely, mistakes can be made, and PCGS was very upfront, and if they felt like the wrong grade was on the coin, they generally ponied up and made it good. So, they would buy the coin back or regrade it and pay the difference. So successful was PCGS. Within a year, there was a multi-month-long backlog, which was very frustrating. And a competitive service, NGC, opened in New Jersey. This is the original NGC holder in a black case, as you see. Looked very good for gold coins, I think. And a sight unseen market developed for PCGS coins with active trading on the ANI satellite network. So you now had two bid levels in the market, sight seen and sight unseen. And it became tougher and tougher to sell uncertified coins, because people began to ask the question, why isn't it graded? What's wrong with it? So even though it took a number of years, if you try to sell an uncirculated seated half now in an auction, you're going to have a lot of trouble if it's not in a holder. People are going to assume there's some reason that it's not in a holder. Finally, to wrap things up, we'll look at recent developments, where we're at and where we're going. I think the past 25 years since PCGS and NGC got started has shown us that third-party grading is here to stay. I don't think anyone can argue that. And third-party grading has spread to many other collectibles, including sports cards, autographs, stamps, currency, comic books. Pretty much anything that's fairly small and fairly portable that can be sent around easily has received the benefit of third-party grading. And between the two major coin grading companies, ourselves and NGC, I believe we've examined over 55 million coins since 1987, which is a lot of coins. In recent years, PCGS has gone worldwide. We've branched out. You see the little map here. You see 1986, us in California. 2010, we moved into Europe, opening an office in Paris. And the last couple years, 2012 and 2013, we've opened in the Far East with offices in Hong Kong and Shanghai. PCGS Photograde online right now is sort of an updated version of the original Photograde book. We have over 2,000 high-resolution, full-color images of about 90 different U.S. coin types in an average of 23 grades each. Okay, some coins, of course, like Morgan dollars, I believe we show as many as 29 grades. Some coins like certain early gold coins that are very, very scarce to find, heavily circulated, we don't have in all the grades yet, but we're working towards getting as many coins shown as possible. And PCGS Secure Plus was introduced a couple years ago that included some technology to positively fingerprint a coin to make sure that if we'd seen the coin in the past, we knew that we were seeing it again, and that gave us a sort of a heads up as to where we were headed with grading that particular coin. One last topic that I'll discuss briefly, there's no slide for it, but it's computer grading. We tried computer grading back in about 1990, and we had mixed success with it. The computer could generate a grade, but it wasn't always a good grade. In other words, the human element still remains very, very important. And I remember speaking to the person that was behind the development of computer grading back in 1990. I spoke to them a couple years ago and said, you know, with the tremendously increased speed of the computer processing and the improved video, you know, the 24-bit video cards and the ability to handle very large, high-resolution files now very quickly and easily, how would computer grading do today? And he smiled and he said, you know, I get the feeling we would make the same mistakes, only faster, which really spoke volumes for the problem that computer grading has, in that there's a certain intangible look that certain coins can have that a human can pick up very easily, that somehow telling a computer that the reflection off the surface doesn't look natural or does look natural is still a very, very tough thing. So I don't honestly believe that we'll be seeing computer grading of coins still any time in the near future. I mean, you know, obviously if you look at a horizon of 10 or 15 more years, lots can happen. But certainly within the next 5 years, I don't see computer grading on the horizon. However, whatever the future holds, one can be sure that it'll continue to evolve, providing greater security, assurance, and consistency, because that is what the market really needs. And you know, with all the progress we've made in the past 150 years, I have every reason to believe that future collectors will continue to be protected by constant impartial standards applied with consistency and accuracy. That's our #1 goal here. We don't always achieve it 100% of the time, but when we don't, we try to make it good. And I believe our track record is pretty darn good. With as many coins that we've graded, you know, there's relatively few that are out there that really present any sorts of problems. So with that said, I'd like to thank everyone very much for attending today, and hope that you'll be able to join us for another future webinar here in the near future. Thanks very much.